Okay, everyone, thank you very much. Thanks for coming to the U.S. Center. My name's Ashley Allen, and I'm with the U.S. State Department's Climate Change Office. Pleased to welcome you here today to the U.S. Center. If this is your first time, this is our U.S.-sponsored public outreach space where we provide information on climate science, climate data, and all the actions being taken at different levels in the U.S. You've probably noticed the Science on a Sphere over there, so hopefully you'll check out one of those presentations if you haven't seen it yet. That's owned by NOAA. And then our NASA Hyperwall here. Throughout the day, we have interesting data sets, climate data sets on that as well from our NASA scientists. And you can also, don't forget about your NASA calendar over there as well. Those are always good holiday presents. Welcome to our online audience. Thanks for joining us at the U.S. Center. We're pleased to have you today for U.S. models for vertical integration in climate governance. So what we're really talking about here is subnational leadership on climate change and linking that up at all levels. Hopefully I summarized that well. Moderating today for us is Shelley Potisha, who is the Director of Urban Solutions from NRDC here on the left. Next to her is Mayor Ralph Becker of Salt Lake City, Utah. Next is Mayor Frank County of Des Moines, Iowa. Next to Mayor County is Harriet Tregoning from Housing and Urban Development Department in the United States, and she is the lead for community development and planning there. Next to her, we have Cliff Rechtschaffen, who is the Senior Advisor to California Governor Jerry Brown. So thank you to our panelists, and let's go ahead and kick it off with Shelley. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to have this incredible panel, and that's in part because what's often overlooked in these climate negotiations are all the stakeholders who are necessary to actually implement the big ideas that our countries are committing to. And so this session is really intended to highlight some of the examples of cooperation, coordination, and innovation among local, state, and national leaders in the United States, and start to probe a little bit about what really are some of the ingredients to success, what are some of the goals that we can start aiming toward after we go home from Paris, and how do we really take the idea of building our communities in ways that are thriving in terms of jobs, economy, affordable housing to all types of people, and also really accelerate our impact on climate pollution. I think one of the contexts that I've been really impressed with during these climate talks is the level of involvement and engagement by mayors. And we have two fantastic mayors here who have been leaders for many years in their own communities and also nationally. They have both been part of the President's Task Force for state, local, and tribal leaders on climate preparedness and resilience. We also have a representative from California, Cliff Rechtschaffen, who California doing some of the most innovative work in the U.S. on climate pollution and doing it in ways that I think are really popular locally. And then we have Harriet Tregoning, who now works for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but she has had roles at all three levels of these governments, state, local, and federal. And I think one of the things that we want to try and get from this crew of incredible experts is, what do they think the keys to success are? How can we work within what we were speaking about before the session, the U.S. framework of governance and how it may be a little bit different than other countries, but how can that actually potentially apply to countries that may have a different level of emphasis, say, or powers that are given to mayors versus a governor of a state versus the national policy, And yet here we think there's some core ingredients that are really important. So what we've asked them to do is to each spend a few minutes just talking about what motivates them. How are they getting here, and what do they see as some of the big wins that have accumulated on the road to Paris? We're going to go by actual local, state, and then federal, just taking a few minutes each, and then we're going to go into a series of questions. So I'm hoping folks in the audience will think of questions they want to raise. We'll have a microphone that you'll be able to ask questions. We'll also be able to take questions through Twitter and such. And so we're hoping to get to as many questions as we can in this relatively short period of time. So Mayor Becker, Salt Lake City, would you please give us your perspective on this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and for giving me and all of us really an opportunity to participate in this amazing convening, international convening, and to be able to talk about this a bit from a local perspective. So I'm a mayor of Salt Lake City, also immediate past president of the National League of Cities. And at the local level, I can tell you this is not an ideological issue. This is not a political issue. This is a real issue that we need to contend with in our communities all across the country. And we face it in different ways. So if you're in a coastal area, you're facing sea level, and you're facing flooding from storm surges. If you're in a place like Salt Lake City, where we're in the midst of the Rocky Mountains, our biggest need and issue relates to water supply. So when we see reducing snowpack, it goes to the core of our little viability of a city and of a community and of a region. So we're seeing reducing snowpack, and it means that we are having to look at how do we adapt when we've built our infrastructure around that snow providing us water in the latter months of the year. It also affects us significantly economically when the ski resorts are a billion-dollar business in the Salt Lake area. And they are experiencing reducing snow and a shorter season, and all of the things that affect a community like ours. So you'll see from community to community all across the region, all across the United States, you'll see varying impacts, but all of us, whether you're George Hartwell from the Great Lakes area or Frank County from the middle of the country along major river systems, you'll see major differences in the way we respond. But as we learned so well in our President's task force, we also know that while the effects are different for all of us, the need to take action is real and now, and that's what we do at the local level. So as we have been approaching this issue in a place like Salt Lake, and as part of this federalist system, where the metropolitan revolution we see as taking hold because we are where the action's happening, we look at, and I can tell you I look at it as the mayor of a city, climate action as one of the most urgent needs that we have to address today. For our survival today, and as time goes on, more and more of a crisis, and more of something that has to be addressed to protect the health and the safety and the quality of our communities. So the way we work in local government, I certainly work as mayor, and I think all successful mayors work, is we work as partners. And we're always looking for partners for how we can be successful in what we need to get done. So in the case of climate change and addressing the increasing carbon emissions, that means looking everywhere I can for both resources and for partners to leverage what I can do as mayor, what we can do as a community. Always that means reaching out to the business sector. Always that means reaching out to the nonprofits and the NGOs and the other organizations that we align ourselves with from topic to topic. Always that means reaching out to the state government where we can. And in a state like Utah, which still has a large segment of people who are deniers or just don't want to address climate change, it means we try to keep them from imposing on us obstacles to us doing what we know we need to do at the local level. And when it comes to the federal level, it means that in Congress where nothing is happening, that's the nicest way of putting it, it means we can take advantage of an incredible partner that we have with the Obama administration, where they are realigning their resources to support local communities like Salt Lake and Des Moines and Grand Rapids and other cities across the country who are working on these issues and either need federal agencies or federal rules or policies to be able to get changed, or where we need resources to help us do our jobs locally. In a place like Salt Lake, we have taken a comprehensive and holistic view. And in my mind, that means everything we do, whether it's in how we develop our budgets, whether it's in where we get our electricity, whether it's what our transportation systems are, that we look at climate change and livability, which go hand in hand for today and for the future, as one complete system. So we're overhauling our transportation system to give people options. In my first couple years in office, we doubled our bike lanes. We're now putting in protected bikeways. We've had massive improvements in our transit service, particularly around rail that's known around the country, to try to keep improving people's options to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. When it comes to our building, which of course is the largest contributor of carbon emissions, it means completely overhauling our source of energy and achieving greater efficiency, whether that's in ESCOs, whether that's in moving to renewables. We have the first net zero public safety building in the country, a $2 billion airport rebuild. We've set net zero as our goal there. Across the board, we look to how we can comprehensively address these issues where we know we need to, and then work with every partner that we can.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shelley. It's interesting, as Mayor Becker has said, here we are in Paris with a lot of ambition and hope about what's going to happen. And there's a lot of people that have, for seems like decades, thought about climate change, thought about what's going on, and at some time in the future we may have an issue with it. However, I think as again Mayor Becker pointed out, we served on the President's task force, and it was pointed out very clearly from all of us that were around the table that we'd all been confronted by individual issues and extreme climate events that had presented themselves in our communities now. We're not waiting another 20 years. We're not waiting another anything. They're happening today. They've happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and we're finally acknowledging there's a cause to it. And we need to address it. The science is out there. We know 97, 90%, 8% of all the scientists on the face of this planet now are in agreement. And oh, by the way, that man has had some part in causing it. So at the local level, as we are confronted by extreme events, how is it that we work together? And I think that partnership that we try to create, not only from city to city, but to other levels of government, on how do we mitigate causes, how do we, by the way, mitigate what happens during those extreme events, how do we adapt, and how do we plan the future more resiliently, and how do we recover more resiliently after these events. In Des Moines, Iowa, it's not like the coast. I see a mayor from Santa Monica out here, and she probably worries about sea level rise in some of those types of events. In Iowa, we're worried about the extreme event, which is a downpour of rain that happens in our watershed. It could happen in the city of Des Moines, but it becomes a little more troublesome if it happens a little further upstream in the watershed. And in a 4 to 8 hour time frame, they get 10 or 12 or 14 inches of rain in that watershed. And knowing that the state of Iowa over time has changed a great deal. 150 years ago, when Iowa was just being settled, we had essentially a lot of wetlands, a lot of potholes, a lot of trees, and now it's a great agricultural area, but we've drained all the wetlands. We've cut down 65–70% of all the tree cover, and we wonder why. And then we've tiled all the fields, and so we wonder why it is that we see extreme water flows, even at that 100-year flood level. Over the last 40 years, it's increased from, we're at the confluence of two rivers, Shelley, in Des Moines, and in 1975, at that 100-year flood level, it was 59,000 cubic feet per second past the confluence. Sounds like a lot of water in a little river. Well, here we are, rather than talk about the interim, just to tell you that it's jumped in 2011 to 107,500 cubic feet per second. It is really extreme and really troublesome, and it causes us to rethink how we do recover. Should we not build in certain areas because the river at those extreme events is much wider than it was before? The water is flowing, everything fills up faster. And should we build walls around our city that are higher, or should we look upstream and try to mitigate? But it's those partnerships with other levels of government and with individuals out in the rural areas. It's all of us working together that are going to find these solutions to these problems, and I think that that's what we're finding here. As Mayor Becker said, we like to share best ideas. I call it legitimate larceny. I'll steal anybody's great idea, and I hope they'll steal mine. And we don't hold it on a partisan basis. It's Republicans, Democrats, no parties, all kinds of people working together to find solutions in our places, doing everything we can with what we have as soon as we can together.
Great, thank you. Cliff, you want to tell us from the state perspective?
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit about across-state jurisdictional collaboration and then local and federal collaboration. California's been working on climate change seriously for the past 15 years. We said we're not going to wait around for the federal government to act. We have a much more cooperative administration now, but not a cooperative Congress, as Mayor Becker pointed out. So in the face of sluggishness in the federal government, we've taken action, and because of the federalist system of government that we have, the states have a lot of authority to regulate an environmental law unless it's preempted specifically by the federal government. So we have a comprehensive climate change program that was adopted in 2006, and we have programs in renewable energy, energy efficiency, clean cars, electric vehicles, energy storage, land use, promoting sustainable land use practices, and we have a cap and trade program. And what we've been trying to do is export our programs, because we're about 1% of the world's emissions, but we like to think that if our examples are successful and replicable, we can influence other states, the federal government, and the world. We've partnered with other states, but other provinces in Canada. We have our cap and trade program is linked with the province of Quebec, and we're about to link with the province of Ontario. We have a regional partnership with Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia about putting a price on carbon, having a low carbon fuel standard. And just over the past year, we've been extremely successful in launching an agreement which now consists of 80 jurisdictions throughout the world, not just in California, not just in the US, Canada, elsewhere, where states, provinces, cities, and regions agreed to take steps to limit temperature increases to no more than 2 degrees by 2050, the scientific level that scientists say is imperative to avoid dangerous climate change, either to limit per capita emissions to 2 tons per person by 2050 or otherwise radically reduce emissions. And very interestingly, we're now embedding ourselves in the international structure slowly but surely, as the UN in this round of the COP is recognizing how critical local contributions like this are going to be to achieving the national commitments. So that's what we're trying to do across the states and jurisdictions. At the local level, we have state policies that influence local land use practices under our environmental impact assessment law, which is comparable to the federal National Environmental Policy Act, local land use planning decisions have to take greenhouse gas impacts into account before they're approved, before projects are approved. As a result of that, dozens of cities and counties in California have adopted climate action plans to dictate how they're going to achieve reductions over the next decade or 2 decades, the horizon of their land use planning documents. The state has also recently issued draft guidelines for general plan laws. General plan is the charter for local land use development in California, and the planning guidelines are imbued with concepts of promoting sustainability to deal with climate change. So that's how we're doing things at the local level. And we've had a great partnership at the federal government as well with the Obama administration. The Clean Power Plant rule dealing with emissions from the power sector gives states a lot of flexibility to design their own programs for compliance. The Obama administration really listened to the states in giving them flexibility, and that's going to allow California to use, and other states to use, renewable energy programs, energy efficiency programs, trading programs, regional programs across state lines, which is a great model to follow. And I want to mention 2 other things. The task force that Mayor Becker and Mayor Kennedy served on adaptation. We were Governor Brown was on that task force, although I'm sure he attended less than these 2 diligent mayors. But I will say that in April of this year, Governor Brown issued an executive order on mitigation and adaptation, and he borrowed very directly from some of the principles that were enshrined in the task force recommendations, including a mandate to state agencies to incorporate promotion of resilience and adaptation in all planning and investment decisions, including long-term infrastructure planning, and to try to take actions that both promoted adaptation and mitigation, borrowed from the federal task force. And then I want to mention one other project where we've really benefited from our federal collaboration. This is something that HUD is sponsoring, a competition, a national disaster and resilience competition, and California's applied for a major grant. Our application stems from the largest forest fire in state history. We are already experiencing a dramatic increase in forest fires, no doubt either caused or exacerbated by climate change. This burned for 2 months, wrecked a local economy in our Sierras, and most perniciously, that area of the Sierras and nearby areas are sources of drinking water for a lot of the states. So prompted by the prospect of federal dollars taking advantage of our state climate policies, we partnered with local counties, cities, and economic development entities to fashion an application that will rebuild the area to make it more resilient, to both promote additional opportunities for healthy forest development, protect the watershed, and respect local desires. So that's an example with 3 levels of partnership: the federal incentives, the state climate leadership, and the local desires. And I want to compliment HUD for really trying to promote the notion of rebuilding from disasters in a resilient way.
Thank you, Cliff. That was great. I'll record everything you said, and we'll make it part of the testimony. You can hear from this panel that we have some tremendous leadership in the U.S. and that the people that are up here are the leaders, not the laggards. But in the U.S., as several people alluded to, we don't have extremely strong controls over land use decisions as some nations have. And there's a lot of autonomy given by our Constitution to state units of government. At the same time, cities and metropolitan regions are where most of the GDP growth is happening. So they're incredibly important in our system. And we're a little bit making a virtue of necessity. We have the very best and the very worst going on in the U.S. We brought the very best with us, but the worst is also there. And it's been a very deliberate strategy on the part of the federal government to try to identify where there's innovation and leadership, to actually draw it out from state and local leaders. Several people mentioned the State, Local, and Tribal Leaders Task Force on Climate Preparedness and Resilience, where it was all about this event. It was backing up from this event about what is it that you need the federal government to do to be your partner? What are the things that we could do that would give you cover, that would give you support, that would help you do some of the things that you already know is necessary to protect your community and make sure that it prospers in a future that involves a very different climate? One of the things in particular that we haven't talked about yet is the many nations actually have governance structures at the regional level. We have very little regional governance in the U.S., even though most of the problems we deal with occur at the scale of the region, whether that's transportation, the economy, housing markets, disasters. All of these are really regionally scaled problems, so we've invested a lot of money through planning grants that Shelley helped to design and administer when she was a HUD official. But also even in this National Disaster Resilience Competition, to encourage partnerships to be formed across units of local government, across state lines in some cases, to create those relationships and those structures that would enable places to be more responsive and anticipatory when it comes to a changing climate and all that that means. As Shelley said, I was a local official very recently before I joined the Obama administration, and I've been a state-appointed official as well. And what I do now at HUD is I actually give block grant and other grant dollars to states and localities. So it's you know, I would say that everyone should have that experience of having worked at the state and local level. I was a federal official at the beginning of my career, and I didn't know anything about how state or local government work, and I apologize now for the bad things I might have said or done because I wasn't very informed. But certainly the way that we are looking at moving our country forward is really relying on the creativeness, the entrepreneurism, and the innovation of people like those we have on this panel today. And we literally have hundreds of experiments going on around the country showing us what is working and what's not working. And maybe as we continue our discussion, we can talk more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Great panel.
Sorry, just let me say, before I move into the integrated discussion part, I see a big audience online, and I forgot to tell you, you can ask your questions by hashtag AskUSCenter. So get those in now so that we can present them to the panelists during the open Q&A. Sorry about that.
Great. Oh, good. I was wondering what that was. Fantastic. Well, so let's go a little bit to the future here. And let's talk about, we're going to optimistically presume that we're going to be super successful here in Paris. President Obama has laid forward a very ambitious plan, and it includes a set of commitments that will aggressively drive down carbon pollution in the U.S. over a relatively short period of time. And a lot of those commitments actually require action at the local level, local and state level, in terms of making buildings energy efficient. You were saying, Mayor Becker, you know, and Mayor County, creating transportation options for people so maybe they don't have to drive for every single trip. California has really been a leader in clean energy generation and using its authorities and the power of the purse to really incent much greater pickup in clean energy generation. What do each of you see as some of the kind of next steps so we can keep this momentum going, which just being here in Paris, it's extraordinarily exciting to see how much enthusiasm there is and optimism. So what do we do next? What do you see happening either locally or nationally?
So as you said, Shelley, I think what we're feeling here in Paris, those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to be here, is there is this incredible momentum going on around the world that we have not experienced before. And the road to Paris, I think with the outcomes that we're seeing taking shape in the agreements, is really the path forward, but it is a step. And as you point out, in my mind, I think it encourages all of us to find ways to leverage what we're doing and to take it to a whole nother level. So we've seen here signed a compact of mayors. Just a few months ago, President Obama issued a call to mayors in the United States and said, I want to have 100 mayors sign up by COP-21 to achieve some very aggressive goals on reducing carbon pollution, 50% by 2020, 80% by 2050. A number of us signed up for it, and it was not at a city level. This was not something where we just said, oh yeah, we're going to go meet this goal. I checked with our folks where we had already made some commitments and said, can we ratchet those up further? Do we know with the accountability and transparency that we've built in with 80 indices we have across the board and everything we're doing in the city, that we can take that next step and that next level across Salt Lake City to achieve those goals? And I think every city, and certainly in the United States, and there are now more than 120 cities, I think, that have signed up, are making similar commitments. So in my mind, our next steps are really going to be us taking the information that we have in our cities and collectively sharing it, stealing it, doing whatever it takes to learn from each other. And then how do we coordinate this in a much better way than we have in the past? Coordinate it with our state partners, where in Utah we can learn much better and maybe achieve some collaborations with California that we could not do with the state of Utah. How do we network with all of these NGOs out there and all these organizations out there that are working in this field, so we can coalesce the information and the ideas and create and build on this healthy competition that we already have, to then take it to the next level, to have it so it's not just medium and larger cities in the U.S., but the smaller communities that have as much an interest, see as much of an impact, but don't have the resources. How do we capitalize on all of the momentum we're seeing coming out of Paris and really build that into a framework of communities all across the globe? Where in the U.S., we're 80% of the population, 90% of the GDP, and those numbers parallel to a certain extent countries all across the world. So how do we, from the local level, take what's going on anyway, kind of in terms of this metropolitan revolution of local governments and local and metropolitan efforts, and really expand that in a way that provides a network for much more carbon pollution reduction?
Well, I might as well jump in. We'll finish with the local, but I think all of us want to, especially at the local level, want to increase our ambition. And of course, it's always a question on how we do it. Mayor Becker asked his staff, how are we going to get there? Can we get there? I sort of had that same conversation with our people, and I will tell you, some of them are very conservative. They'll say, well, I don't know, Mayor, we gotta, we're gonna have to check this and that. We're gonna have to run the numbers, and we'll get back to you in, so many months after we look at all of our stuff. And I know what we can do. I know what if everybody has the ambition and really works across departments, and together we can achieve things. So we looked at some of our opportunities, and I said, all right, I'm making a commitment. We're going to go to 25% here. We're going to go to 50% here, and I'd like to think we could get to net zero by a certain point. And of course, it sort of pushes them into being a little more creative and a little more aggressive on how they're going to get there when you kind of challenge them with those kinds of ideas. But I think that was part of what we did in our task force, by the way, kind of going back to that just for a second. Looking at all those 26 different places around this country and all the people that were looking at it. And I think that it originally, the administration was thinking, well, we'll get 10 or 20 good ideas and this will be great. Well, when you have, 8 governors and 16 mayors and a couple tribal representatives kind of working together to come up with some ideas who come from all over this country, I believe the number was like 464 ideas. And so I think the idea of really ending up with a set of recommendations on how federal government can better partner with us in terms of planning and getting us technology that will help move our opportunities forward, finding financing mechanisms that can help us as well, and looking at some of the opportunities that we're aggressively going after in the United States of America, and then sort of applying that globally gives you some sort of hope and that we're going to be able to achieve much more than anybody has envisioned up to now, because some of the ambitions of some of the places I think could be much more aggressive than what they are. And I think that some of the work that locals can do can fill in that gap that we need to get, because I don't even think that we've calculated local savings. Not only on clean power, our local energy provider, Mid-American Energy, has 7 years ago was mostly coal and a little hydro and a little nuclear and a little gas. Nothing else. They're now 40% wind. We can do that. We can get somewhere, and then throw on top of that the efficiency in the building, because the BTUs and the watts of power that we don't use are even more important than the ones that we can figure out how to generate some other way that maybe is less polluting than otherwise. So I think we have capacity, we have ideas, and a lot of that's coming up from the ground up. Certainly we can use all the help from the other levels of government.
I think one of the things that's clearly different is that the mayors have collectively really raised the bar, you know, for everyone, every sub-national unit of government, saying that this is absolutely possible and we can do it ourselves. We don't need the permission of the national government to do it, and it's in our interest to do it, because for the subnationals, the innovation is in itself a brand, right? It's something that will help the economy and the employment prospects for that city. All the cities are in, and states for that matter, are in a fierce global competition for investment, whether that's human capital or whether that's dollars. And by being innovative, by being risk-taking but also action-oriented, I think that helps tremendously with what it is that they're trying to accomplish. From the national perspective, at HUD, our primary constituent is low and moderate income households, right? And so what we talk to the subnationals about is how, not just the what, but how. How can we first serve the people that are most vulnerable to a changing climate? If we're going to be investing in energy efficiency and renewables, why don't we start with HUD-assisted housing and low-income housing? Poor people spend a much higher percentage of their income on utility bills. They also spend a much higher percentage of their income on transportation costs. So why wouldn't we invest in low-cost transportation that's also low-carbon transportation? And I think these are the kinds of ideas that are really taking hold and making me very optimistic coming out of COP, that we have tremendous wind at our back, and I think we're gonna do some great things in the United States.
We're optimistic. The Clean Power Plant rule which is the centerpiece of the federal administration's INDCs. It's being litigated, but while it's being litigated by maybe half the states in the country, almost all the states are coming up with compliance plans to implement the plan, and they're very practical, they're very doable. There's a lot of cheap ways to get there. So a lot of the states we think will get to compliance, and that will be a very, very big deal. I also want to take a moment and have an advertisement for the California story, because we are doing what other states will need to do and what some states like New York just pledged to do. New York just pledged to have a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels by 2030, which is what's in a California executive order from earlier this year. But we've been cutting our carbon emissions. We're going to be at 1990 levels by 2020 through the recession and afterwards, and California is still leading the country in the number of jobs created. Our pace of recovery has outpaced the rest of the country. We have a 33% renewable portfolio standard. The legislature just a couple of months ago raised that to a 50% renewable electricity standard by 2030, and every utility in the state supported that goal. The reason is we've been able to achieve 33% with almost no impact on rates and no impact on the grid. It's very doable, and it's created thousands of jobs in the state. We've had energy efficiency standards for appliances and buildings in California since the early 1980s, as a result of which we are 40 to 50% more efficient than the rest of the country, and we've saved something like 80 or 90 billion with a B dollars in for consumers in natural gas and electricity savings. That saves energy, saves greenhouse gas emissions, saves money, and that's an easily replicable set of standards. And likewise, our standards for clean cars have resulted in ultimately a partnership with the federal government to increase fuel economy standards to 54.5 miles per gallon, which will save consumers thousands of dollars in energy costs over time and reduce greenhouse gases dramatically. Further standards like that are also doable, practical, and replicable.
That's great. You can kind of see this is the coalition of the willing, but it's also motivated by real people's needs to live affordable, comfortable, vital lives. Do we have a question?
We do. We have a question on the web, so I'm going to buck tradition, and we're going to do the web question first, but then we'll get to see your questions in the audience. This question is specifically for Mayor County, focusing on the fact that Iowa is one of the major food producers in the U.S. So this is a question on food security and resilience. What policies or ideas have been discussed to protect food production in the river basins that you talked about that are flooding? And then let me broaden that a little bit since we're in the international arena. How are you sharing those kinds of approaches with others that might be facing the same problems?
That's a really good question. I think that obviously the ag portion of our state, which is around 25 million acres of ag producing land, is trying to address how they get better yields, how they work with the ag area to and sector, if you will, to see if they can't increase production and yields and all that sort of thing. In the face of that, I think that we have to look at it, and this is the urban person talking, that is such an important sector, not only for today, but for the next 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. I think that we all have to work together to think about the future of food sources. So we have to be very careful that the practices that we use today are in no way disturbing the ability of my grandkids and great-grandkids out there to be able to do the same thing and get similar yields and be able to do food sources. So I think that we're in the process of having a discussion around that politically and otherwise to get rural, suburban, urban people to all come together to coalesce around the future of agriculture and what that means, and share the outcomes of this discussion with others. Because I think that there's history around the globe of societies that didn't properly manage their resources, and in the face of huge events or just misuse of your resources, you get to a situation where you can't produce anymore. The Anastasies, the Mayans, the Easter Islands, some of their history, if you look back on it, you would think that they depleted their resources and all of a sudden they were there for 200 or 300 years and all of a sudden they were gone. They went someplace else, and you go in and look at the whys. I think the United States has to be very careful. California needs water. Iowa sometimes has too much water. We have to look at what we do to protect our resources in the face of all that. Iowa, because of that too much water and that valuable soil that is easily transported by water someplace else, we have to make sure that we don't erode it because we leave the fields all open 12 months a year. We have to figure out how to rethink it, but I think it's a very good question. I appreciate it. I will tell you that we are working very carefully to try to find ways, and we hope it doesn't get to rules and regulations and laws that gets there, that we hope voluntarily everybody wants to do the right thing, but I think at the end of the day, we have to plan for the future and make sure that we preserve it for, as the Native Americans would say, the seventh generation, that they can have the same benefits that we have today and we do no harm.
I might just mention from a city's point of view, an urban point of view, when we talk about a low carbon future, when we talk about sustainability, one of the heart elements of that is food security. And in a place like Salt Lake, which for decades really was a self-sufficient economy, and where we've removed a lot of our agricultural land, what we are looking at is how do we address food security and bring back that self-sufficiency to our community so we reduce all the transportation costs and energy effects of all that big supply chain, so that we take advantage of technology through more vertical gardening. The community garden movement in urban America is one of the most popular, fast-growing parts of our communities. Whether we recreate, in some places, agriculture along our rivers where we've had residential development before and we're taking residential development out and recreating agriculture. So I think in urban areas as well, what you're seeing is a whole movement around what we do to provide food locally, to support local businesses, to remove impediments in our policies. When we were doing a synopsis of all of our ordinances and policies in Salt Lake City, we found you could not have greenhouses in your backyard if you had a garage because we are limited to one accessory unit building as part of a residential zoning code. So we got rid of all that so that people could have hoop houses and greenhouses, so people could have vegetable gardens in their front yards. So people could have beehives and grow and have chickens, not roosters, but chickens, as part of their urban environment. So there are a lot of things that we find ourselves doing at an urban area to provide a much stronger food environment for our city.
Anybody else want to take anything on that question?
I would just say in California, which is the largest agricultural state in the country, we're dealing with a devastating drought that, again, has either been caused in part or exacerbated by climate change, and certainly is a foreshadow of what we'll have to deal with in the future. We have 5% of our historic snowpack. So it's forced us to think about many new strategies to provide water for communities, not just agricultural communities, but other communities around the state. We're promoting recycling, stormwater capture, and for the first time ever, California never regulated the use of our groundwater. We were the last state in the country to allow private use of groundwater. We passed a law last year that requires that local communities develop plans for sustainable management of their groundwater resources, and that's a very proactive measure. We're going to have a lot, it's going to be driven by local governments, but going forward, we're going to have to proactively manage groundwater, and we're also talking about better capture and storage in groundwater basins. So that's the new normal in California. Even though we want to continue with our production, we have to do so in a water-constrained world.
Sounds good. Thanks, Megan Fink, for that question. You prompted quite a discussion. Food is an important, very, very, very important issue for climate change. Okay, so let's take a couple of questions. We have 7 minutes left, just so folks know. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Elizabeth Woodworth from Victoria, BC, Canada. And my question is for the Obama administration. In World War II, after Pearl Harbor, there were only 139 cars produced for the rest of the war. They just they were ordered by FDR to stop making cars and start making planes and guns and munitions and so on. And that was allowed to happen because it was a presidential emergency. And things are going to get to the point, we're at 1 degree now and things are already really serious. And I think it's going to get to the point where there will have to be a state of emergency declared. And at that time, the president could conceivably say to the oil companies, now's the time we need to transition you guys, just as they did with the automobile industry in World War II. So my question is, has the Obama administration considered helping out the oil companies, because they're in big trouble now with the carbon bubble, and if they were required to start moving over to wind turbines and solar panels and heat pumps for homes, it could make a big difference.
Okay, and let's take one more question so that we have a variety here. This one here.
Hi, my name's Ann Hunter-Purtle with EPA. I have a question for the state representatives. From California, you mentioned the renewable portfolio standard. In Iowa, I'm curious, you mentioned that in 7 years, your local utility transitioned to 40% wind power. What were the policies that folks put in place to get there? Is that replicable in other states? Is that something that other localities might be able to look at? Thanks.
And both fairly short,
Okay,
please.
I'll try to be short. I mean, I think we are not going to be doing, in the last 12 months of the Obama administration, something like mandating that we stop the production of automobiles and move to something else. But I will tell you, in the same way that the automobile was the disruptive technology of the 20th century, you know, the smartphone is really the disruptive technology of this century. And one of the things that's true about the automobile is it's something that is used parked 90% of the time and used 10% of the time, and even less in cities. And that value proposition is increasingly unappealing to a lot of young Americans. And we have a proliferation of options that are really beginning to happen. So I know that globally we're talking about a lot more automobility, but I also think that a lot of that automobility might end up being shared, which would allow more people to participate in being able to have the benefits of automobility, which are profound in some circumstances, but without the cost of that ownership, and with many, many, many fewer vehicles potentially. So I do think that we have a lot of policies in place that are encouraging shifts to lower carbon alternatives for all kinds of things. And I'm hoping that, along with the leadership that you've seen up here on this panel today, will help us make very significant progress. There was a state question for you.
No, it's fine. I'd just like to say one thing. I think we have to think about sensible priorities. We have to look at how we're spending money at the federal level, and unfortunately, separate from the administration itself, there's powers that be out there and dollars that influence how the federal government spends money. So we need to think differently and think about what really means something to the future of the United States and to the people, and rethink maybe how we're spending our money, and maybe spending more money than everybody else on the planet almost together on military. We ought to rethink that.
Oh, the question on renewable energy both California and Iowa. If you could address that, what policies put in place to increase renewable energy?
I think we should hear from Mayor County. The renewable portfolio standard in California is very replicable, and something like 25 or 30 states have similar standards of some kind or another. Although some of them, ironically enough and tragically enough, under attack recently.
Real quickly, in Iowa, I think we achieved it one way. There was a movement to try to add more power to the grid. There was a citizen uprising and a political uprising that was sort of against building more coal plants. So they had to figure out a new way to get there, and as a result of some of the things that happened through the administration and other ways, they've got renewable energy tax credits that were very helpful, and Mid-American Energy made that switch, and but it was two things. One, the people saying no more coal, and two, so where do we go from here? And the tax credits really helped.
I would just add in the price of wind has come down by 50% over the past half dozen years, and it's cheaper than coal in a lot of places.
And the price of photovoltaics also down 95% since 2008. And your clean power rule at EPA will also make an enormous difference.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but let me turn it over to the moderator for any closing summary remarks or anyone else that wants to make a final comment.
Well, maybe we could just quickly, you know, in tweet fashion, short, if you were giving advice to the negotiators, what would you ask them to do?
Well, encourage them to come up with the strongest agreement that they can, obviously, in terms of the 195 plus countries that are coming together around how we reduce our carbon emissions. But I think as we're seeing coming forward in this agreement, it is to give the encouragement, the incentives, the authority at the subnational level, at the local level, for us to build and leverage the creativity and innovation that is occurring at our level of government, and the agreement that we have that is non-ideological across the board to coordinate and work together to get things done. Because we are getting things done at the local level. It's kind of our mantra and our necessity. But we also, I think you'll find on this issue, are almost universally very forward-thinking. And where someone isn't forward-thinking, they tend to get out of the way.
Okay. I would just encourage everybody, I think that where we started this discussion is how do we engage all levels of government, all levels of people, from your homes, from your businesses, to local government, state government, federal government, to work together to create as much incentive and ambition as possible to move forward.
I would say, indeed, a strong agreement, but also the recognition that we are doing this in partnership. So the vertical integration of government is very important, but so are philanthropy, the NGO sector, the private sector. That has also been hugely encouraging at this COP-21. And I think those things also need to be woven in to the agreement, and we need firm commitments from those other sectors, and that will help us get to where we need to go.
Stay the course.
There you go. Good. A round of applause for our presenters. Thank you all so much. And thank you also to the many local leaders that are in our audience, and thanks for watching online. Tomorrow, I am thrilled to announce that we will have U.S. Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz speaking here at 11:15 a.m. on global clean energy efforts, the Clean Energy Ministerial. And then at 12:30, we will have EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy talking about the Clean Power Plan, which you heard so much about during this panel. So we hope you join us then, and you might want to get here early to get a seat. All right, thanks a lot.